Hi, hello, good morning. Good afternoon. Respected Madam Principal, Vice Principal of the college, our resource person, my dear colleagues, and all the students present who watched this doc host by Shillong Commerce College, Department of Political Science. And before we move on with the program, I'll just highlight the program. We are celebrating the 125th birth anniversary of Subhas Chandra Bose, and I will be the chairperson, Assistant Professor in Political Science Department, and welcome and introduction by the chair, myself, welcome addressed by my colleagues, Sir Mantri Prasad, which will be followed by a special item by NCC, Shillong Commerce College, and addressed by the principal of Shillong Commerce College, Dr. Sen, which will be followed by a talk from the resource person and an interaction. After the talk, we will have an interaction with the resource person. So I request my dear students to prepare with some of the questions, and we will have a vote of thanks by Sir Ping San. So that is it. And I hand over this part of the program to Sir Mantri.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sir Shimre. So before we start, as the department in charge of the Political Science Department, myself, Mr. Mantri Prasad, who is also one of the faculty of the Political Science Department, would like to welcome each and everyone to this very auspicious day. Of course, it's not on the exact day. Netaji Jayanti is on the 23rd of January. Actually, I think this year it's the 125th, so it's a very special occasion in which we are celebrating the memory of Subhas Chandra Bose, one of the foremost figure during the Indian freedom struggle. From the department, before we proceed into the actual event, from the department, we'd like to give a few thanks to the principal of the college for helping us to organize this event. And we also give our wholehearted gratitude to our resource person for today, Dr. Atig Ghosh from Visva-Bharati University from West Bengal. So we are delighted to have you here with us.
Today's my pleasure, Doctor.
So today, why we are celebrating Neta, I think this is the first time maybe in our college we are actually, talking about commemorating the memory of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. Of course, he left us. He left us before our independence, right, 1945. But his mark has been profound, right from the 1920s, right from the beginning of the freedom struggle, right, during his days in the Indian National Congress, his tenure as the president of the Indian National Congress, as well as his other endeavors, including his most well-known exploits in the Indian as the leader of the Indian National Army during the Second World War, which was a very tumultuous, a very chaotic period of time. And I think one of the most important contributions you can say that he really, even though he had his differences with the INC, right, specifically with Gandhi regarding the methods of how to attain our independence, we cannot disregard his attempts in, especially in terms of bringing national unity, bringing a sense of nationalism towards the Indians, the Indians all over the globe, because he united Indians not just here in India but all over the globe, and he pooled the resources. He managed to get the resources of Indians from all around the globe in this fight, right? During the Second World War. So, of course, I won't add much to this. We have our principal also who will be sharing a few words, and she has some lovely stories also for us for regarding Netaji. And of course, we have our resource person who will be delivering a talk on this subject. So on behalf of the department, I would give my sincere thanks and a warm welcome to each and everyone who have joined us for this program. So enjoy. I hope all of you, enjoy this program as well as gain benefit from it. As well as, of course, later on we may have, we will be having a short interaction. So there we maybe will have a sort of a discussion regarding the life and the achievements of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. Thank you.
Yeah, before we move on ahead with the doc, we are privileged and honored to have a special item from NCC Cadet Shillong Commerce College. They will be entering a special number. So may I request Thank you so much, NCC Cadet, for presenting such a beautiful patriotic song. In order to move ahead with the program, we are now privileged to have our dear Principal Dr. Sen. He will be addressing and giving a short message regarding Subhas Chandra Bose. Madam, the time is yours.
Hello, a very good afternoon to everybody. Respected Chairperson, Mr. Shimre from Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, Reverend Professor Atig Ghosh, our resource person from the History Department of Visva-Bharati University, West Bengal, respected Vice Principals, Mrs. J.C. Blah, Dr. Sonita Khongwer, dear faculty members of both BA and BCom stream, members of the non-teaching staff, and my dear students. A very big namaskar to all of you. A very blessed afternoon to you all, and a warm welcome to this program. It's cold here in Shillong, but we are very excited. We are here today on the eve of 125 years of Netaji Jayanti, or Parakram Divas, a day of valor. Today we are indeed blessed to have amidst us Professor Atig Ghosh to share his expertise on the life, ideologies, and philosophy of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, a visionary, a fierce freedom fighter in the pre-independence era of India. Sir Ghosh, we welcome you virtually to Meghalaya and to Shillong Commerce College. I wish Corona was not there, then you could have come to visit our state and our college. Once again, warm welcome to you, sir. We are beholden by your instant acceptance of our invitation in spite of your immense hectic schedule in the university today. I know you are a very busy person, sir. Thank you so much for agreeing, though we don't know each other and yet you are so humble. You really, I'm so impressed with your, humility. Dr. Ghosh, I would like to inform you that Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose visited Shillong on the 12th of June, 1927, and stayed at Kelsall Lodge in European Ward and the present-day Auckland area. That is also the area where I stay now. He was in Shillong for health reason, and he stayed till 18th October 1927. He again visited Shillong in September 1938 as the president of AICC and stayed at Ashley Hall near the Earl Sanatorium. And that is the present day, that is for my students to know. Earl Sanatorium is situated next, in fact, it is in the same complex where we have the city hut, the dhaba that is there. And Earl Sanatorium is really famous. Many big people came, big shots came and stayed there at that time. And during those times, Shillong was a very healthy place and people would come for health reasons there. On this visit, he delivered patriotic speeches at Polo near Matri Mandir, Opera Hall at Thana Road, Khasi National Darbar Hall at Jayao, Jail Road, then Harisabha Laban, and Hindu Mission Anath Ashram complex at Maupuram. In one such gathering, Netaji said, and I quote, "Yes, I'm a patriot. I love my country. If patriotism and terrorism are synonymous, then I would never object to be abused as a terrorist. My only question is, why should our country remain under the yoke of foreign rule? Freedom is the birthright of an individual. So as soon as possible, the British should quit our country. We will rule our country ourselves, and this is normal. Even if we shall have to take up arms and plunge into the fight against the British rule. I reiterate, we do not have any animosity against the British. They can stay in our country at ease, but not as rulers. Everyone in the audience was mesmerized at Netaji's magnetic personality and oratory at that time, and many young men joined the INA from Shillong. It is said that Netaji had a special association with Shillong and its people. He was highly impressed by the democratic functioning of the Khasi tribes and Khasi states when he came in September 1938. And he said, those who want to know about democracy should come to Khasi Hills. This is exactly what is said at that time. The rest is history, which we are eager to know from our resource person, Dr. Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh, once again, a warm welcome, and please do visit our college once personally. Happy Parakram Divas to all of us. Let us honor and celebrate the founder of the Indian National Army. And in the words of Netaji himself, I would like to quote, one individual may die for an idea, but that idea, after his death, incarnates itself in 1,000 lives. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I hope the talk that Dr. Ghosh is going to give us, and I know the talk that Dr. Ghosh is going to give us today, it is going to enrich us about the lives, ideologies for which Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose gave his life for his country. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madam Principal, for giving such a short and sweet message on Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. Now, before we hand over the program to our speaker, Professor Dr. Atig Ghosh, I would like to give a short introduction about Sir Atig Ghosh. Teaches history at Visva-Bharati, a Central University, India, and is a member of Mahanepan Calcutta Research Group. He studied history at Presidency College, Calcutta, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and Centro y Estudio y Asia y Africa, El Colegio de Mexico, that is in Mexico City. And he did his PhD on the colonial making of the Mofusil in 19th century Bengal. He has published variously on the political economy and culture of the 19th century Bengal, the statelessness in South Asia, accumulation under post-colonial capitalism, surveillance technologies of the post-colonial Indian state, and multimodal migration in the making of the border town of Siliguri. And at present, he is engaged in writing a history of vernacular histories produced in Bengal in the 19th and 20th century, and also a history of political violence in the contemporary West Bengal. Sir, it is a privilege, and we are so happy and glad to have you as our speaker. Sir, the time is yours. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me, all of you. Let me begin by apologizing for the technical glitch that we were facing at the beginning. The fault lies entirely with me and my Luddism, my ineptness in handling technology. The second thing, but the most important thing that I want to say is that I want to convey my gratitude to the organizers of this lecture, and particularly to Principal Madam, Dr. Sabita Sen, who has been so kind as to consider my name for this very honorable lecture. What I'm going to do here today, you know, my friends jokingly often call this time, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, my Subhas Chandra Bose phase, because this is the time when I'm delivering lectures on Subhas Chandra Bose in many places every year, and therefore it often so happens that one risks repetition. And I therefore every year try to write something on Subhas Bose, so that I would not risk that repetition. And this year also, for a volume that is coming out from Oxford University Press, I've been writing an article on Subhas Chandra Bose, and it's a very long article. Dr. Sen has kindly given me 1 hour, but I think I was asking her yesterday that whether the audience is composed of undergrad students, so I'm not going to tax their patience by speaking for 1 hour. I'm going to speak for 45 minutes. I'm not going to dishonor Dr. Sen also, because she has asked me to speak for 1 hour. I'll speak for 45, 50 minutes, and then we can go into the Q&A session. And that is the best part always. I feel that I am growing old and my mind is becoming arthritic. So we always look forward to young people for opinion, their views, their reflections, that kind of enables us to think in fresh ways. So this paper the title has been passed and most of it has already been written. The first draft is already through. And I've received the comments of Subhas Bose, and so the paper is through. It's a long paper. I'm going to read the last part of it. This paper, the last part of it, the paper is called well, I'm not going to really read. Sometimes I'll read, sometimes I'll not. I'll talk in a free-ranging way. So the title of the section, the last section, is a quote from Subhas Bose. Subhas Bose is eminently quotable. Sometimes one feels that he spoke to be quoted. He designed his speeches in a way so that people could quote him. He's very, he's a quotation producer kind of. So here's a brilliant thing, and he spoke brilliantly, almost as brilliantly as Jawaharlal Nehru. They seem to be like born speakers. He said in Nagaland, he said, "It does not matter who among us will live to see India free. It does not matter who among us will live to see India free." This is the subtitle of the last section of my paper, and the whole title is "Afterlife of Subhas Chandra Bose and the Politics of Remembering." So let me begin by saying that the talk I'm about to deliver today is mostly derivative in nature. That is, by way of offering the mandatory apology that is required of a person trained in history, this talk is founded largely on secondary material published by scholars on Subhas Chandra Bose and some archival material, of course. Further, the paper assumes the audience's familiarity with the comprehensive, though often somewhat partisan research on Subhas Bose that over the years has covered the overarching vector of Bose's career. And as such, the talk focuses narrowly on a snatch of his life, or afterlife, as I shall explain momentarily. Now, the point I would try to make is quite simple, and let me throw it out to you at the very outset. It is not uncommon for us to think of Subhas Bose conjointly with considerations about Mohandas Gandhi. Already one of the speakers before me has mentioned this. So almost we never come up with the name of Subhas Chandra Bose without mentioning Gandhi. Now, there is no problem with this. That is what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to pull a pseudo-Plutarch. Plutarch was the Greek historian who wrote parallel biographies of one Roman and one Greek. His bioi paralleloi, his biographical comparative biographies are very famous. So there is a tradition that has come up here also, where we compare great figures: Subhas Bose, Rabindranath, Subhas Bose, Gandhi, Nehru. I'm not trying to do that. Gandhi and Bose were contemporaries, yes, nor is this intended to be a pop historian's attempt to make absurd contrasts between actually similar figures of history, say in the manner in which Hitler and Stalin are often contrasted, when in fact they were quite the same men. The contrast between Gandhi and Bose can actually stand up to historical reinterrogation, and as such may provide us an entry into the argument. Bose was different from Gandhi in two fundamental ways. First, towards the later years of his regrettably short life, he openly advocated a violent overthrow of the British Imperium. And second, Bose firmly came to believe that how this was done, the means in question, was definitely not more important than the goal. In fact, the means was not important at all for him. These two positions Bose stuck to steadfastly till the mysterious end of his political career. Interestingly, in rightly celebrating Bose's contribution to South and Southeast Asia's struggle for freedom, we emphasize the former and silently brush under the carpet, some of us somewhat embarrassedly, the latter. The argument here is what is today fashionably called Foucauldian. We remember Bose the way we do, not because we want to, not because perhaps that there is any unquestionable historical agreement mandating such a hegemonic rendering, but probably because we are taught to do so. Taught by the Congress top brass in general and Nehru and Gandhi in particular from the time of Japanese surrender in the Asian theater of the Second World War. That was on the 15th of August, 1945. Now, this is the pith and marrow of my talk today. Let us indulge in a thought experiment here. If I were to ask all of you to close your eyes for a moment and think of a mental image of Subhas Chandra Bose, almost all of you would imagine him in uniform, pointing towards Delhi in an erect military posture or riding a war horse in full military attire, his index still pointing capitalwards. Whereas, if you were asked to do the same for Gandhi, you would imagine him sitting at his charka, his head bowed, his stature frail and draped in minimal khadi, or probably walking towards Dundee, stick in hand, his head still bowed, his stature still frail and draped in minimal khadi. You may interpret this as a politics of post-colonial statuary, and you would not be wrong. Far from it. However, such politics is inevitably informed by how a consensus was crafted by crafty statesmen regarding how a hero ought to be remembered. Even Gandhi's detractors, even Gandhi's critics would readily accept that his memorialization in the above sculptural manner is historically tenable, is historically believable. They may criticize him for being thus, but they will accept it. And indeed, Gandhi was to a great extent thus, no matter whether all this was conscious role enactment or ideological conviction. The problem in Bose's memorialization would also be accepted, is that it would also be accepted to be true. Bose, however, was a military man of whatever controversial quality only in the last few years of his active life. Before that, he was an astute politician within the broad church of Congress politics, a winner of elections, even in the teeth of Gandhi's opposition sometimes, and a loose adherent of constitutional resistance in its various forms. This was the Subhash Babu his young followers idolized before he went in for the military solution. It seems to me that his transformation into the symbol of military aggression against the Raj, the Netaji of the Indian National Army, was a mythologization that was carefully fashioned after the Japanese surrender and by the Congress to serve its own ends. Our story, therefore, must of necessity begin with that momentous and to many unpremeditated event. Let us delve into Bose's constructed afterlife. Now, the sudden end of the war with Japan in mid-August 1945, on the 15th of August 1945, of course, all your teachers know, but those of you who are in your undergraduates may not know this yet. Some of you may know that the 15th of August, on which we celebrate our birthday, this nation's birthday, is not a date important in the history of the Indian national movement. It is a date important in the imperial history of Britain, which won the Second World War in its Eastern Theatre on the 15th of August, 1945. 2 years later, Mountbatten suggested that date as the day of independence for India, and it was accepted. Our Independence Day, as Gandhi had been celebrating it from the 1930s, was the 26th of January. But the Indian politicians, the Congress politicians at that point of time and others, did not want to wait till the 26th of January 1948. They wanted what was coming then and there. And so Mountbatten could kind of smuggle in a date which is freighted with imperial glory, not nationalist sacrifice, but imperial glory, as our day of independence. We celebrate it as such on the 15th of August. This is the date on which in 1945, Japan surrendered in the Second World War, thereby bringing the Eastern theater of the Second World War to an end. So this sudden end of the war, it was not expected to end this way, but suddenly ended. The sudden end of the war with Japan in mid-August 1945 was as much a surprise to the scattered British and US forces in Southeast Asia as it was to the Japanese army. The invasion of Malaya, planned for late September, had to be mounted in haste as a peaceful but cautious occupation of Malaya, Siam, Indochina, Java, Sumatra, and other allied territories. Such an improvisation could not be immediate. And when it took place, the recovery of the POWs, the prisoners of war, was necessarily its first object. Thus, before the arrival of the allied troops, the retiring Japanese were able, if not to sow, at least to allow to be sown the seeds of the political unrest which has burgeoned in those territories since. In Malaya, the first country to be occupied in strength, the effect of a 3-week anarchy was least unfortunate. But even so, it was then estimated that in order to bring the country back to its former tranquility, a considerable occupation force would be needed for some years. In Java and Indochina, Indochina is today Vietnam, as you know, Indochine. In Java and Indochina, the delay considerably prejudiced the return of the colonial powers, for these countries had been partially controlled by nationalist governments for some weeks before the occupation forces arrived. Now, the effect on the Indian National Army was the disappearance of nearly all the locally enlisted soldiers. When the British arrived in Malaya and Siam, few but the ex-prisoner of war members of the INA remained in their camps. Their examination and repatriation was nevertheless to take many months. This was, in a sense, the second half of a problem. It already must have been clear that the disposal of members of the INA captured in battle must have been clearly full of difficulties for the Indian government. The matter was not simply one of discipline and justice, please understand. These men had valuable military information about the Japanese and experience of Japanese methods, which in some way enhanced their value as soldiers. The information could be written down and handed on, but it was dangerous to allow a soldier full of the propaganda, this is, I'm quoting the British, full of the propaganda of Subhas Chandra Bose to return to the Indian army, unquote, which had been so carefully protected against subversive nationalism, even to improve its knowledge of enemy methods. Besides interrogating the returned soldiers for enemy information, therefore it was necessary to assess how safe it was to return a man to his battalion or regiment. Many were found fit to go back, however. The British actually found many soldiers fit to go back, though they were exposed to the ideology of the INA. The great majority, whose spirit was thought not to have been completely broken, were sent to rehabilitation centers before being returned to the army. Those who had been so influenced that they were in effect virulent Axis propaganda agents were retained in custody. The service organizations responsible for this assessment and for the long succession or arduous interrogations which often preceded it was housed with its prisoners in the Lal Killa, the great walled fort palace of Delhi, which had been the focal point of much of the drama of the Indian Mutiny of 1857. So you see, soldiers were being brought back as prisoners of war. They were being brought back to a place which was famous for another mutiny which had happened around a century back in 1857. So it had a great deal of symbolic value that they were being brought back to the Lal Killa, the Red Fort in Delhi. And the goal, it was also the goal of Delhi, of Subhas Bose's hopes, embodied in the slogan, Delhi Chalo, the battle cry of his soldiers. Thousands of them, however, did not reach it in the way Subhas Bose would have wanted to reach them. They wanted them to reach the Red Fort, the Lal Killa, as victors. Thousands of them ultimately reached the Red Killa, all right, but they reached it as prisoners of the British. In a very few cases, and it must be remembered that every one of the 1,500 members of the Indian National Army taken in the Imphal campaign had committed the gravest possible military offense, treason and desertion. The disciplinary aspect therefore predominated. A few viceroys, commissioned officers, NCOs, and senior sepoys caught in battle distributing or shouting propaganda, firing on British Indian soldiers, or betraying them to the Japanese, were tried by court. They were tried by court-martial and imprisoned or executed. You know, soldiers are not tried in civil courts. They're tried in criminal courts. They're court-martialed. So they were undergoing, all these INA returnees were undergoing court-martialing. A like fate overtook some of the submarine and parachute agents who tried to carry out their espionage missions in India. These cases numbered less than 30, and the executions only 9. Only 9 soldiers were executed, and less than 30 people were court-martialed and imprisoned. No other disciplinary action was taken at all. The mass surrenders of Jayanti in Yangon and in Singapore and Bangkok when the war ended presented the first half of the problem that we are already discussing. There was still information to be gleaned for security and historical purposes, but partly because of the animosity displayed by the returned prisoner of war against the INA, discipline became the main consideration. The marks of the earlier security classification, black, gray, and white, were retained. But the question was now the degree of a man's guilt, and whether or not, with or without his arrears of pay, he should be discharged from the Indian Army. Over 10,000 INA soldiers were repatriated from Rangoon between May and October 1945. In September, a further 7,000 surrendered in Malaya and Bangkok. So you can understand the number is growing. The number of these POWs are growing. They're already they stand at 17,000 by September 1945, October 1945. The evacuation of many thousands of Allied prisoners from their fearful camps was the first call on shipping, and it was not until March 1946 that the last of the INA left, the last member of the Indian National Army left Southeast Asia for home. This had certain consequences. In the 11 months which had elapsed since the first contact of the Indian Army, Navy, and Air Force with the mass of the INA in Rangoon, there had been widespread fraternization. These were all Indians, as you can understand. The members who were fighting for the INA and the British Indian Army were both composed in its lower ranks, in its lower sepoy ranks, and also in its lower official commissioned ranks. They were all Indians, and they were in a foreign country in Southeast Asia together. The one as the victors, the other as defeated, but they were all Indians. So they were fraternizing. They had to talk to each other. And even to the loyalist of Indian Army man, Subhas Chandra Bose was a hero, a figure. He may not say that publicly because he works in the Indian National, the British Indian Army, but somewhere his parents think so. His family members may think so. His neighborhood friends may think so. So he was already, in a way, under the influence of the image of Subhas Chandra Bose when he got in touch with these INA, when he went to capture these INA to bring them back to Delhi. But as you see, first the prisoners of war were rescued, then the INA people were shifted to Delhi. So this break that came in between 11 months when the captors and the captives were staying together in a foreign country, they fraternized widely. They became friends. This could not be avoided. All were Indians serving in a foreign country, and contact with the INA often meant the reunion of close relatives separated since 1941. Its result was a political consciousness with which the Indian serviceman, which the Indian army man had never before possessed. Such a political consciousness which arose in the Indian army because of this contact with this fraternization with the Indian National Army had never been there in the Indian army before. This army man, if you look at this serviceman, if you imagine this serviceman, he received a picture of the Indian National Army uncorrected by observations of the prisoners of wars or by any official statement. He saw it as a band of oppressed heroes and listened eagerly to the hospitable and now fully politically conscious Indian civilians of Southeast Asia, who had their own tale to tell about the independent Indian government and the departed glories of Subhas Chandra Bose's cabinet. Indian soldiers who had seen the truth about the INA at Imphal were fast leaving the army, and there was often no voice to contradict the stories of universal INA heroism in battle. Thus, gradually, the Indian armed services, the Indian army, came to have a certain sympathy with the popular clamor about the INA, which was being raised in India. And there can be little doubt that the serious naval mutinies, as you know, and the unrest in the other two services early in 1946 owed something to its influence. The British Prime Minister himself was compelled to recognize the new feeling. I'm quoting, let me find the quote. I'm quoting now. Clement Attlee was the Prime Minister, Labour Prime Minister. On 15th March 1946, Clement Attlee said, "Today, the national idea has spread, not least perhaps among some of those soldiers who have done such wonderful service in war." So even the British Prime Minister could understand that the national idea has spread among the armed forces. That is what he means to say. Popular reaction in India had been slow at first. In July 1945, the battle between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League on the one hand, and between the Congress and the British on the other hand, had been resumed. It seemed in Delhi that the apparent impossibility of a communal settlement might delay India's independence for a further decade. It was not clear in 1945 that India would get independence in 2 years. In fact, we know if Clement Attlee had not won the election, but Churchill had been returned to power, we might not have had our independence in 1947. And also, you know, the communal question, how the separate electorates are going to be fixed, whether there would be two countries, etc. They had become such thorny issues that there was a general feeling, the newspapers were writing at this point of time, that India's independence may be delayed by another decade, by another 10 years. The mass of the Indian people, on the other hand, was contented and peaceful. And while the Congress might abuse the British, there was no theme to arouse popular indignation. No General Dyer, no massacre of Jallianwala Bagh. There was no event which would ignite popular spirit. So it was a low tide of political activity that was going on at this point of time. Then the war ended. And the story of the INA, hitherto regarded as a military secret, was released in an official announcement. Jawaharlal Nehru referred to the matter on August 20th. See what Nehru is saying here. I'm quoting Nehru. Now, a very large number of officers and soldiers of the INA are prisoners, and some of them at least have been executed. At any time, it would have been wrong to treat them too harshly. But at this time, when it is said big changes are impending in India, it would be a very grave mistake leading to far-reaching consequences if they were treated just as ordinary rebels. This is what Nehru is saying about the INA prisoners, that one cannot treat them like ordinary rebels. The punishment given them would in effect be a punishment on all India. If you punish them, it would be a punishment on all India and all Indians, and a deep wound would be reacted in millions of hearts. At the same time, bodies of legendaries for Germany, unrepentant truculent, and some still in German uniform, were seen in trains and on stations as they were taken to their camps and regimental centers. Bose's mysterious disappearance caused further publicity. A film was smuggled out of Singapore and shown privately in Delhi. By the end of September, as much as could be obtained from the unofficial sources, supplemented by the stories of returning POWs and Indian civilians from Yangon and Malaya, had been widely circulated. So the INA and its imprisonment was becoming a huge national issue. The government of India had announced that the rank and file of the INA who yielded to pressure and were so misguided as to join forces raised by the enemy would be leniently and generously treated. Only the leaders were to be court-martialed and those charged with atrocities. So the British had already said that all the INA soldiers would not be punished. Only the leaders and those charged with atrocities, those who have committed atrocities, would be war crimes, would be punished. All else would be treated leniently. The first Congress reaction was favorable. At first, Congress reacted to this favorably, said, okay, the British are saying something logical. But then they understood that this could become a political issue for them to exploit. And immediately, therefore, we would see the Congress mood shifting. So at first, the Congress reaction to this decision of the British on how to treat the INA rebels or INA soldiers was favorable. But in mid-September, the All India Congress Committee resolved that it would be a tragedy if these officers, men and women, were punished for the offense of having labored, however mistakenly, for the freedom of India. I'm quoting the AICC. The AICC, therefore, earnestly trusts that they will be released. So now the Congress are demanding their release. 2 days later, the Congress set up a defense committee to handle the cases of the INA soldiers, and civilian members of the Indian Independence League brought to trial. It soon became known that the three commanders of the INA, of the Indian National Army campaign near Mount Popa in 1945, were to be tried by court-martial in November. So this news spread that three commanders of the INA at Mount Popa in 1945, they were going to be court-martialed in November. There was immediate and widespread public interest. The trial was attacked by the Congress as an act of savage oppression, and the handling of the whole matter by the British was condemned. The INA was eulogized. The Congress is eulogizing the INA. Can you believe it? And Gandhi was still alive. The INA was eulogized and glorified in the most fulsome of terms as of its own propaganda. Its object was the same as that of the Congress itself, and its sufferings were in the same cause. The Congress were now saying. The Congress was now trying to appropriate the legacy of Subhas Chandra Bose now that he had disappeared and the INA had been captured by the British. Nehru is saying, Nehru had no doubt, quote, no doubt that men and women who had enrolled in this army had done so because of their passionate desire to serve the cause of India's freedom. Also, that if owing to some technical interpretation of military law, large numbers of them received severe sentence, it would be a tragedy for India, unquote. This is what Nehru is now saying. This was clearly to be a test case then. The Defense Committee went immediately into action with the most illustrious members of the Indian Bar prepared to do battle. Bhulabhai Desai was chosen. Bhulabhai Desai was chosen as to conduct the defense. He was the most famous Indian barrister at that point of time. The accused, as you know, the three commanders of the Mount Popa campaign of the INA, to whom I'm referring, you know, were, most of you know, all of you in fact know, the accused were Shahnawaz Khan, General Prem Sehgal, and Captain Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon. All regular officers of the Indian Army. They were all regular officers of the Indian Army who had deserted and gone over to the INA, whose actions in the Mount Popa operations and the Battle of Meiktila in 1944 was interpreted as an act of waging war against the King Emperor. So this was the charge brought against them by the British, waging war against the King Emperor. There were 17 defense councils, among them Jawaharlal Nehru himself. 17 lawyers were defending them now. Bhulabhai Desai leading the pack, but Jawaharlal Nehru himself was one of the lawyers. when the trial opened in the Red Fort on the 5th of November. On the 5th of November, we know that the trial of Shahnawaz Khan, General Prem Sehgal, and Captain Gulbaksh Singh Dhillon started at the Red Fort. And defending them were Bhulabhai Desai, Jawaharlal Nehru, and 15 other eminent barristers of Indian origin. The charges were of some complexity, involving not only the general conduct of the officers in waging war against the king, but death sentences they were alleged to have carried out on the soldiers of the INA. The trial lasted until December 31st. It began on the 5th of November. The trial lasted till December 31st. Every word of it was reported throughout India with long commentaries day by day. Today, for every news that is true in India, but you must understand that we are talking of time which was more than 76 years ago, then, you know, everything did not become news like it does today. But every day, every hour of this trial was reported with long commentaries in the newspapers. The defense was a bold challenge to the legality of the trial. It was argued that the INA was the military force of a properly constituted and widely recognized government, which the accused had joined as true patriots. There were long and intricate appeals to historical precedent and international law. As for the death sentences, the defense challenged the evidence that any executions had taken place at all, forcing one prosecution witness to admit in court that he had been tutored. There were 30 witnesses for the prosecution and 12 for the defense. Some of the men who had themselves been prominent under Subhas Bose. 125 exhibits were produced, and the published report on the INA trial, which is available at the Nehru Memorial Library, in the Indian National Archives, in the National Library. I'm sure it would be available in the big libraries of Shillong. The published report of the Indian National Army trial runs into 387 closely printed pages. From the first day, the attention of India was therefore focused on the courtroom and the Red Fort, whose place in nationalist history greatly heightened the drama. Long before the end, the country was in an emotional uproar. Long before the trial ended, the country was in a state of emotional uproar. Everybody had been kind of, electrified by this trial. The honor and the law of the Indian National Army are on trial before this court, said Bhulabhai Desai, the defense lawyer. And the right to wage war with immunity on part of the subject race for their liberation, he said. The trial of Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, was recalled. As so himself, Bose also often referred to Bahadur Shah. We are going to come to that. And here is Nehru again. I often quote Nehru because Nehru very precisely says what the situation is. He's a very good speaker. So here's what Nehru says. I'll find the quote. So it's slightly long quote, so I cannot remember it. Behind the law, there was something deeper and more vital, said Nehru. Something that stirred the subconscious depths of the Indian mind. Those three officers and the INA became symbols of India fighting for independence. All minor issues faded away. The trial dramatized the old contest, England versus India. It became, in reality, not merely a question of law or of forensic eloquence, but rather a trial of strength between the will of the Indian people and the will of those who hold power in India. Within the courtroom, therefore, the law was still the law. Unfortunately, the judges cannot be ruled by passion and emotion. They are ruled by laws. So within the courtroom, the law was still the law. The charges of waging war were found proven. And likewise, one of the charges arising out of the death sentences. All three officers were sentenced to cashiering and transportation for life. They were not given death sentences. They were given sentences of transportation for life. It was clear that the matter could not rest there. But by then the British knew that even transportation for life would not be accepted. It would create huge problem even within the Indian army. So apart from other considerations, there was by this time a strong uninformed feeling on the subject in England as well. The commander-in-chief, at this point, at the point when India got her freedom, the commander-in-chief was Field Marshal Sir Claude Auchinleck. He remitted the sentence of transportation. He cancelled the sentence of transportation, but confirmed the other penalties. Since it is, that is what Auchinleck said, Field Marshal Auchinleck said, since it is in all circumstances a most serious crime for an officer or soldier to throw off his allegiance and wage war against the state, the principle had to be upheld for the sake of the stability of all lawful governments. The purport of this sober judgment was lost upon India. The commander-in-chief's action amounted in the popular mind to an acquittal, and the announcement a few days later that there would be no more INA trials except for atrocities was seen as an admission that there had been no case to bring to begin with. The Congress was triumphant. It had rallied the people of India and revived the old militant anti-British feeling of the civil disobedience days. It at once began to agitate for the speedy release of the men whose cases had not yet been examined, and harried the government to complete the repatriation of those still held abroad. Mohandas Gandhi visited the Red Fort frequently. Can you believe this? And conferred with the detainees. And it is not surprising, therefore, that Shahnawaz Khan, upon his acquittal, when he was released, forswore the path of violence and adopted the Gandhian ideal of non-violent politics. The prisoners themselves made life increasingly uncomfortable for those responsible for the disciplinary assessment. This remaining task was hurried through, and the returned INA soldiers sent back to their villages with all speed. There were a few more courts-martial of those concerned with the alleged atrocities at the Bidadari POW, the prisoner of war camp. But in May 1946, just as the trials of the officers who had allegedly tortured Captain Mahmud Khan Durrani were about to commence, all remaining charges were withdrawn. There can thus be little doubt that the Indian National Army, not in its unhappy career on the battlefield, the Indian National Army was not very successful in the battlefield, as you know. So there can be little doubt that the Indian National Army, not in its unhappy career on the battlefield, but in its thunderous disintegration, hastened the end of British rule in India. The agitation which surrounded the trials turned the issue of independence for India into an instant burning question once more. Subhas's suddenly amplified figure, says Subhas Chandra Bose's friend Dilip Kumar Rai, added to the romance of an Indian army marching, singing to Delhi, galvanized a frustrated nation out of its torpor, and substantially damaged the insulation of the Indian army from the magnetic currents of popular enthusiasm for immediate independence. It would be too much to suggest that Bose had seen with any clarity what might occur after Japanese defeat, although he certainly counted on the disbanded INA to influence the Indian army in Burma after he left it. But Subhas Chandra Bose knew that the Indian struggle would soon be renewed, and he had urged his followers to remain steadfast in the faith he had given them, believing that somehow or other they would have their part to play. That the greatest influence he ever exerted lay in the accidental effects of the trials, whose setting in the Red Fort turned so much to the advantage of the Congress, does not diminish the authenticity of Subhas Chandra Bose's vision. The loss of that vision was, to India on the threshold of independence, a portent only less significant than the assassination of Mohandas Gandhi in 1948. For when he disappeared, Subhas Chandra Bose was only 48 years old. That is 8 years younger than Nehru, still comparatively a young man for all his 24 years of politics, still somewhat the voice of youth, still with an irresistible appeal to the young and unquestionably with a distinguished contribution to make. It is for us to assess and appreciate both what his contribution was and what it might have been. We must judge of the validity of his non-communalism, of the soundness and expediency of his domestic policies. These are complex inquiries. Today, let us set them aside and attempt to answer only the question Subhas Chandra Bose himself would have asked. Will I live in history? Will Subhas Chandra Bose live in history? There were undeniable faults. All people have faults. All people have faults. He too had his failings, his frailties, if you want to call them. There were undeniable faults. His undergraduate self-assurance grew with the years into a prodigious arrogance. In 1928, as a young man with little more than his years in prisons to serve for political experience, he had no hesitation in asserting not only that the British were wrong, but that Gandhi was wrong, that the Indian struggle had no place for mystics and vague philosophers. In the following 10 years, he grew only more certain that Gandhi was wrong and that he alone was right. Gandhi was an old, useless piece of furniture, Bose declared in an interview with reporter Alfred Tirnoya at Vienna Hotel. Bose's Congress presidential year in 1938, very famous year, by which perhaps Gandhi hoped to bring the angry young man into the mainstream of Congress development, led in 1939 to open defiance. And in his short-lived triumph, Bose talked to Gandhi as to an opponent he had beaten at the hustings. Even the crushing defeat which moved him from office, the failure of the popular support of which he had been so sure, and the reluctant Congress disciplinary action against him held no message for his impenetrable self-esteem. He was still right, so right that he must escape from poor, enslaved, misguided India in order to save her, not only from the British, but from herself. Under Axis patronage, he behaved more and more like a dictator. The arch-rebel tolerated no rebellion against himself. No criticism, no failure to cooperate in the way he had chosen. The man who had been so sensitive to the sufferings of others could now condone brutality towards his opponents. At the end, when he was too remote from the political scene for sound judgment, when his own intolerance had cut him off from any corrective friendship, the Congress, Jinnah, Lord Babel were still wrong. Gandhi could not be trusted to do the best for India. Russia, of all people, could be relied upon for help. Some other things we look for in vain. We seek in vain. There was laughter, but no humor. His wit was bitter, leaden-footed by this time. The distinction between friend and flatterer was not always clear to him. His rhetoric, stirring in Bengali and Urdu, held in English only the stereotyped phrase, the toneless repetition. There was no lack of physical courage. He could stand as straight as any under aerial bombs and bullets. The escape from India, the journey to East Asia needed great spirit. He maintained a brave independence from the Japanese, but there were moments of unsteadiness. The flight from Meghtila, the outburst against staff officers' desertions, and the orders against treachery. The final plan to put himself at the mercy of the advancing Russian armies in Manchuria was bold enough, but many vacillations preceded it. At Saigon, Singapore, Yangon, even in Tiananmen, where he first said that he would fight to the last. The revolt against the Congress in 1939 was bold, but indecision preceded that too. There were the illusions about the outcome of the war, about communalism, about Russia, about Indian army, the INA morale, and the readiness to believe what suited him. The failure to grasp the social and political advantages, political changes which war had brought about in India. His comparative naivete in matters military, as Iwaichi Fujiwara, the Japanese general, had pointed out in his memoirs. Yet, it is something to be sure of oneself, to stake all of one's own judgment on one's own judgment. Many of Bose's weaknesses were the weaknesses of his single-minded strength. For most, the personality of the man was overwhelming. There was a genius of enthusiasm, of inspiration. Men found that when they were with him, only the cause mattered. They saw only through his eyes. The thoughts he gave them could deny him nothing. For the INA, as for Bengal, there was no resisting his compulsion. Rabindranath Tagore, the Nobel laureate, you may know, had once hailed him as the longsword Deshonayak, the country leader, the one who would unite and reawaken the country. Shahnawaz Khan echoed the feelings of many of the officers too, when he said of him, "From the moment I came into personal contact with him, he exercised a strange influence over me. Even now, I do not know in what proportion the man, the soldier, and the statesman in him were blended. At home, the man in him seemed to dominate. At the front and in the midst of his troops, the soldiers in him shone in splendid glory, and in the councils and conferences and at his desk, his brilliant statesmanship made a profound impression on one and all of us. The fact that he was not such a good soldier, not the infallible political genius his disciples believed, makes only more remarkable the power of his fascination. He gave to the Indian communities of Southeast Asia for the first time a common idea and inspired in many of the soldiers a loyalty which for the time obliterated their sentiment for the remote king emperor. In this alone, there was an element of greatness. The greatness of the single-minded, dedicated leader, if only of a forlorn hope. Was he then more than this? The answer must be found in the nature of his dream of India. To what end did he wish to lead? In considering this, there is to be remembered his predominant feeling for the unity of India and his sense of the ingrained vested evils which possessed her. Poverty, ignorance, the caste system, and other social anachronisms of Hinduism would not disappear of themselves. Subhas Chandra Bose thought these ills could be removed. The many social and religious components held together, and India turned into a modern industrial democracy only by a strong authority acting on a well-made, long-prepared plan. Bose's belief in an authoritarian government for India had grown up in the West, but his model was the Turkish regime of Mustafa Kemal Pasha, who seemed to have faced the same problems of social adaptation that confronted India, and not the Nazi and fascist caricatures, as often Subhas Bose's detractors stupidly say. Bose saw a strong Congress government settling down to the accomplishment of a great social and industrial revolution in India, and then handing over, after perhaps 20 years, to the processes of democracy. Gandhi, on the other hand, was not only unwilling to make any plan beyond independence, he seemed to lack the interest to wield power at all. Here lay the heart of Bose's quarrel with him. Beneath it was the turbulent Bengali inheritance. Bose believed that a constitutional transfer of power would leave India divided, and the new governing party without the authority and prestige it needed to carry out the reforms. Fighting the British was an essential source of unity for India and of political prestige for her future governors. The more bitter the struggle, the greater the glory. Hence came his insistence that the struggle must continue to the last, his advocacy of revolution in 1939, his horror of a negotiated settlement at any time, and his leaning even towards terror tactics as the ultimate means of preventing it. Bose had always seen that British defeat in war might create the opportunity for the essential seizure of power. When, after his failure to lead the Congress to rebellion in 1939, impatience overmastered him. His first idea was for Russia to champion Indian independence before the Germans won the war. His next, that he should influence German treatment of India himself. His move to East Asia reflected the early Japanese victories. He obtained from General Hideki Tojo what Hitler had withheld and planned to save India from Japanese military government, heading the Congress's dictatorship if necessary himself. Even after he realized the certainty of Japanese defeat, he hoped for a foothold in India from which, with an expanded INA, he could keep the India crisis in being. The loss of Burma and the hard, sorrowful march to Bangkok did not destroy that vision. Bose still thought his objective attainable in India, whatever happened to Southeast Asia. He now saw the INA carrying his influence into the Indian army to loosen still further the British grasp and to deepen nationalist confidence. Still, he must battle against any political compromise in India. Still, outside help must be secured for the struggle, whether from the USA, whose continued sympathy he sensed, or from the USSR, whose post-war opposition to the West he clearly foresaw. Never would Subhas Chandra Bose give up. Somehow he was sure the dream would be fulfilled. After its fulfillment must come reform. He believed with every fiber of his being that until the ills of illiteracy, caste, public corruption, and the near slavery of women had been eliminated, India would not be ripe for democracy. Until these things had been set right, until the people had some idea of why they were voting, until some degree of responsibility had been induced in the press, no administration could hope to govern save the British had done by autocracy. Nor could anything but autocracy accomplish those reforms. The ills were too deep, rooted in too many vested interests. By the magnitude of this conception, by the example of his magnetic burning zeal, his tenacity and personal force, by the tradition he left of sacrificial patriotism, must be measured the stature of Subhas Chandra Bose. His place in Indian history cannot be denied. Idol of the masses of Bengal and beyond, his youthful daring, his panache, his reckless courage caught the imagination of India. He gave much to his country. Even after the ruin of all he built, something of substance remained. Had he lived to see the Republic of India, he would assuredly have given much more. There is something yet to be said before we leave the tragedy of Bose. Bose played his part, some would say a heroic part, in the history of this country. Had his early life not been scarred with racial hatred, and had Indian politics taken a different course in the years 1919 to 1921, his part might have been incomparably greater. Bose can be read as a symbol of all that went wrong between Britain and the people of India, whom he had tried so long to earnestly rule. Thinking of Subhas Chandra Bose, I often find myself thinking of some lines from Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses. With these lines, let me end my lecture today. How does newness come into the world? How is it born? Of what fusions, translations, conjoining is it made? How does it survive, extreme and dangerous as it is? What compromises, what deals, what betrayals of its secret nature must it make to stave off the wrecking crew, the exterminating angel, the guillotine? Is birth always a fall? Do angels have wings? Can men fly? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sen, the organizers.
See, if you can just repeat the last few things, what he said, because the internet just went off.
Hi, hello, sir. We couldn't hear the last few sentences that you were narrating because the internet just
that was
went
a
off.
quote from Salman Rushdie, so
Okay.
it's all right if that is all right.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. It was really nice listening to yours. Yeah, it was mesmerizing, and you are indeed a good storyteller as well, and your knowledge. We are really enlightened to hear from you, sir. So if there is any question that the students want to ask, the platform is open to all of you. While the students
there is already a very interesting question. I see about it is a question that my friends and my friends from the Northeast and we have been trying to delve into the participation of the people from the Northeast in the INA. Actually, the INA records are not complete, and we really do not know. The Subhas Bose has put together a team which has Anup Shekhar Chakraborty, Jilangamba, and many others. I have heard that you're trying to put together the statistics for the composition of the Indian National Army's rank and file. But I do not know the exact figures. Having said that, of course, we know that Southeast Asia and in Northeast India, there was massive participation in the Indian National Army. The Indian National Army's rank and file kind of exploded, one could say, when the war effort was arrived. Though it is in the Northeast that the Indian National Army was defeated. The Imphal campaign, Mount Popa, we know of the details, where they're very well known. They're in any textbook, but it is also in the Northeast, you could say, that in the Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose's effort to destabilize, to promote the disintegration of British rule in India, could physically reach, ideologically it could reach many parts of India, but physically the effort of Subhas Chandra Bose, the northeastern states of India are fortunate, I would say, that they had the opportunity to experience it directly.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, I have prepared another question, if you can.
Yes,
it is Subhash Chandra Bose regard Gandhi. He remarked Gandhi, as you have said earlier, an old chair or old furniture. But in spite of that, he also seeks Gandhi's blessing before he goes for war. And in fact, he was the first person to address Mahatma Gandhi as the father of the nation from Burma. So what I want to ask was, what inspired Subhash Chandra Bose? Who are his role models, if we can know any?
Subhash Chandra Bose, by his own account, Subhash Chandra Bose's two role models are the traditional role models of any Bengali youth at that point of time, Vivekananda and Rabindranath Tagore. When he was in jail in Mandalay, he would often write and Kazi Nazrul Islam's songs also inspired him, but not to the extent to Rabindranath's songs inspired him. Because when he was in jail in Mandalay, he would write letters, and in that he would write that in my days of imprisonment, it is Rabindranath's songs that inspire me, that keeps me alive. And Vivekananda also formed a very important part of his ideological makeup. If we are to talk about a concrete philosophy of Subhash Chandra Bose, it would be difficult to delineate that. Not because Subhash Chandra Bose did not have a philosophy, so to speak, because he was more a man of action. He would not take the time to put down his thoughts. But if you talk of influence, and Chittaranjan Das, his mentor.
Yes.
Chittaranjan Das. Okay.
But philosophically speaking, it was more Vivekananda and Rabindranath. Though people make a big deal about his conflict with Rabindranath, tomorrow I'm giving a lecture in Visva-Bharati about Subhash Bose and Rabindranath and their exchange. It was not an enmity at all. In fact, Rabindranath, towards the end of his life, dedicated his play Tasher Desh to
Okay. Sure, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Sir Shimri, may I comment?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask some question?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, Lasuporki Prangap here, Faculty of History Department.
Yes.
Sir, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir, I can see. Please.
So, thank you so much for the insightful, enlightened, and much needed lecture on the life of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. Thank you so much, sir. And so I would like to ask some questions regarding in relation with Northeast India. Like how far Netaji's ideology and his ideas impacted the youth of Northeast India, if you have any knowledge on that, and then also in particular regarding the Khasi, Jayanti, and Garo people, if the INA, how far the INA became popular in these hills during that time. So thank you. That's one question.
Yes, sir. As I said in response to an earlier question that was sent to the chat box, we do not have the statistics of the exact number of people from the Northeast recruited in the INA. But as you have correctly said, the impact of INA on the youth of Northeast India, I will have to say that so far no work has been produced on this. This would be, therefore, now that you point it out, and it's such an interesting angle to think with, I wonder if somebody is working on this. I really don't have the cultural impact, particularly on the people, the youth, the contemporary youth and people of that time. Of course, now Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose has been made into a national role model in certain senses, and people adhere to his more, to his vision and nationalist goals. But at that point of time, was the people who were living here resentful of the kind of war that he had brought here, or were they were more accepting, they were absorbing the nationalist spirit that he represented, is something I am not certain about, because not a line has been written about this as far as I can remember, by Dilip Rai or Sugata Bose or Tutor. Now nobody has written so far.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
So you can request your students to do a PhD on this. It would
Yes,
be a very
absolutely.
groundbreaking study. It would be,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
Groundbreaking
Yes,
study.
yes, sir.
We all can take up a job.
So this interaction seems to be getting more interest and getting more excited. And there is another question coming up. So shall I read out for the benefit of everyone? Why made Netaji collaborate? What made Netaji collaborate with Nazis to defeat the British when he knew that Nazis have the same ideology as the British, perhaps even worse? I don't get this question.
The British and the as long as the cause, what he said.
No, it was yes. This is a question which is often it comes up. Why did Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose want? He finally did not get the support of the Nazis. Hitler refused to give him what he wanted, so he came to the Eastern Theater, where Hideki Tojo, the Japanese president, gave him support. But he did try. He did try to get the support of the Nazis. He did try. Now, the point is that he was also trying to get the support of Stalin. He was also
Russia.
He wanted any kind of support that he could garner.
The cause matters, no?
Yes.
Cause matters. Needs don't matter.
And of course, we can say that following your point of view, we will say that the Nazis would have been a worse solution than the British.
Yes, that's true.
It is not that they had the same ideology. A more dangerous, a more violent ideology to offer us. But then, as I told you, these were his weaknesses. These were his fallibilities, as I was telling you in this paper. And when we try to, in India, when we try to do biographies, we have this problem. Either we call that person a horned devil, or we call that person a saint. So biography and crashing, we cannot take a middle ground. So that's why Indians have traditionally been very bad biographers. Read biographies that are in India. So we have to get the Madhyama Pantha, you have to try to the middle path. We don't want to create a hagiography of Bose. So I told you what his fallibilities were, their frailties, human frailties were. His arrogance, his extraordinary arrogance was there. But weaknesses were the weaknesses of a single-minded strength as well. You just listen to what his INA soldiers or his people were saying about him. They thought that he was this infallible God. So he must be this fascination, power of fascination, something we must also analyze. But yes, of course, he went wrong. Even going with Tojo was a dangerous decision. He thought that he will be able to keep out the Japanese.
Yes.
But we do not know what would have happened if the Japanese won the
That's true.
We might be we might be delivering this lecture today in Japanese.
Yes, for all you know. Sir, may I come in?
Yeah.
Sir, so maybe for him, the cause mattered more.
Yes.
The cause mattered more.
Yes,
he was
absolutely.
passionate. He was passionate about the independence and freedom of a country, and that's why he went desperate and sought help from any end that he could get. So means didn't matter much. It's the cause that mattered. That's what I understand.
What the means for him? It is always there.
Yes, that's true, sir. Yeah. Achha, sir, there's one question from my side. Tomorrow, So as Netaji's birthday, and the central government of Oz are putting a statue there at India Gate and dousing the flame, which was there. Yes,
The
which
Amar
was
Jawan
there.
Jyoti.
Yes, Amar Jawan Jyoti, which was there for the last 50 years or so. What do you think about it?
Is this a trap? No, but
What do you think of that?
And say, this is the most destructive, absurd thing that a person can do. I'm
Yes.
a person who has lived in Delhi for a very long time. These open spaces around the Amar
Yes.
Jawan Jyoti,
Yes.
those places we used to love to visit, have ice creams there.
Yes, that's true. That's
and
true.
kulfi there. And now you're building it up in this monstrous show of power.
I just don't understand that.
Monumental monstrosity that is coming. Of course, you know, architecture is never without its politics.
Yes, yes, that's true.
And this architectural politics particularly reprehensible, in my opinion. This has nothing to do with my love for Subhas Bose.
No, nothing. Even I believe that.
I would give my life to protect that statue that is there in the Shambazar 5
Yes,
corner.
Shambazar. Yes, the Shambazar statue
because
is
it is a
really good.
historical
Yes, yes.
statue. And they were thinking of building a flyover and removing the statue.
Even
And
I
we all
would agree.
protested, went there, and
Yeah, that's true.
quoted arrest. But here, you know, I would oppose the installation of
Yes,
Netaji.
that's
They
what
can
you
only
want.
put out the Amar Jawan Jyoti flame by installing Netaji's statue.
Yes.
And this is the ugliness of that politics.
Yes. That nothing can be more sad than that, I think so.
So I stuck out my neck and
and it reminds me of a poem by T.S. Eliot, you know, who said that, you know, like carrying the remnants of a graveyard after many years, you know, the bones and the skulls, and putting it into the drawing room as a showpiece. So I feel it is almost, I'm comparing the poet T.S. Eliot's saying to this modern happening that is going to happen tomorrow, probably.
we can do very little.
I know.
Yes.
Maybe to woo the voters of West Bengal.
Statues have always been a source of huge political grandstanding. Statues are things that you do political grandstanding.
Yes, it's very sad actually.
Yes.
It's very interesting, sir. Your talk was indeed very interesting. Your narration was so good. We were really mesmerized with your talks. It's so very informative. History is so interesting.
It was really a fruitful discussion.
Very fruitful discussion. I'm sure my students.
It was a great privilege for me I have not been to Shillong for a very long time. Previously, Nehu used to call me, but now what has happened is due to Corona, we travel nowhere.
Yes, I understand.
So it's deeply saddening for me to not be able to go and meet you all in person and have a greater time than this.
Yes. Looking forward to
we are really looking forward to this Corona to come to an end, and we will meet. We will meet definitely, sir. And let this visit of yours virtually not be the last visit. Let this be the maiden visit. Okay, sir? We will collaborate again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll hand over the program to my colleague. One more question.
Oh, there's one more question.
You will ask one more question, and
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I can hear you.
Hello, sir. Pinkasan Siem here from the Department of Political Science.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to ask from you. So we all know that the Germans and the Japanese at that point of time had agreed to collaborate with Subhas Chandra Bose. So, but we all know that in times of war, alliances are made because of certain agendas. So Netaji's agenda
I
was.
could not hear the last part. It came in an echo.
Because it's too near.
So in times of war, we all know that alliances are made because of certain agendas that the countries have. So Netaji had allied or had collaborated with the Germans and the Nazis in order to help fight against the British to attain India's independence. But sir, I just wanted to know what was the plans or the agendas of the Germans and the Japanese on India?
Japanese, first of all, the Nazis did not support him materially. The Nazis supported him theoretically. And Hitler, in fact, refused to meet him also. And it was while he was in Germany, just on an aside, I want to say it, the Indian national anthem was for the first time played. Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose played Janagana Mana Adhinayaka Jaya He as the national anthem in Germany, in the Vienna Orchestra. So, but, the Nazis gave him theoretical support. The Japanese gave him material support. And about the question you're asking, what would have been General Tojo's plan, Hideki Tojo's plan about India? I think it is simply occupation. Tojo had done that all over the Pacific. So Tojo had never gone anywhere as a liberator. Tojo had gone in all these places as a colonizer, in the guise of a liberator. We're saying that we are putting up nationalist governments, Tojo sometimes said, but those nationalist governments were often enough fronts for the Japanese administration. So I think even in India, the case would not have been different, but for the fact that Subhas Chandra Bose was present. And Subhas Chandra Bose had that magnetic character who could galvanize the spirit of his own army. And therefore, Subhas Bose maintained his independence from Japanese strategy all throughout. All his comrades have told us later. So had Subhas Chandra Bose failed to control the Japanese, if in the event that the Japanese won the war, then India would have become a Japanese colony for some time at least. And that is what I think.
Thank you, sir, for your opinion.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Yeah, we will hand over this part of the program to my colleague, Sir Ping San, and he will give the word of thanks. So, yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It has been such an honor to be a part of this wonderful event. On behalf of the Political Science Department, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guest, Dr. Atig Ghosh. Your observations on Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose is something that we should always keep in mind when viewing India's freedom struggle from a historical perspective. We all owe you a special vote of thanks for taking the time to be here with us this afternoon. I would also like to thank our Madam Principal, Dr. Sabita Sen, for her efforts and time to materialize this great function. To Sir Mantre Pasa for his warm welcome speech, to the NCC cadets for their impressive contribution to this event. Also, not forgetting Sir Ngayaipam Shimre for meticulously hosting this function. Finally, I would like to thank all of you present here for making the time to be with us today and helping us make this event a grand success. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, all of you. You are such nice people. I really hope that I could have met you. Thank you. So should I leave the meeting?
The meeting has come to an end.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, sir.